Hello, and welcome to the American Council on Exercise live webinar continuing education series. My name is Jackie Crockford, and I am your presenter and host for today's live webinar. I am the ACE Exercise Physiology Content Manager, and I'll be guiding you through today's presentation. Thanks for joining us very much. If you are joining us and watching today, you are watching live via YouTube, so thanks so much for taking that time. If you have questions with today's presentation, be sure to use your chat bar on the YouTube viewer. You can type in your question for our presenter, and if you have any technical issues, you can also type in your question there, and I will be monitoring those throughout today's presentation. If you would like to receive CECs for today's presentation, make sure you use the link on the screen, and that is acefitness.org/past webinars. You are watching today for free, and so if you would like to receive the CECs, you will need to make that purchase on the link provided. Once you make the purchase, you'll receive a recorded version of today's presentation within your MyAce account, and you will also receive a quiz. Once you pass the quiz, you will receive 0.1 CECs within your MyAce account. All right, if you're ready, let's get started with today's course. Welcome to your course, Understanding the Fascial Network, presented by the American Council on Exercise. My name is Jackie Crockford, and I will be your host for today's presentation, and I am joined by our presenter, Pete McCall. Pete.
Hey, how you doing, Jackie?
Good, how are you?
And welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to the American Council on Exercise for letting me be a part of your education program.
Yeah, perfect. So we've had you here before, and you've been a friend of ACE and health and fitness expert for us, subject matter expert for us for a long time. Today we're going to be talking about the fascial network.
Correct.
So tell us a little bit about why this topic in particular, kind of now, is something that we need to be talking about with our pros.
Well, a lot of this is a great question because a lot of this is a culmination of what's going on in the research arena about understanding more about the tissues that make up the body. And when it comes to exercise, a lot of times we focus on the muscle, but we overlook the connective tissue, which connects all the muscles to one another.
Right.
And so, Jackie, what I want today's session to be about is to be for two audiences. One, for the professionals working with clients. You're going to learn a little bit of information here that you can apply to clients and you can apply to the classes you teach. But two, it's also for professionals themselves. Because when we teach classes, we're active all the time, right? So we should have, if you're active as a fitness professional, you should have a little bit more information about how you can take care of your body so you can avoid injuries. Because if we get injured, we can't work.
Exactly.
Yeah, so one thing about and we don't get we don't get time off.
Yeah.
We're sidelined from teaching classes. So that's really what it is. I want you to understand how to apply this for your clients, but also how you use this information for yourself.
Great, sounds perfect. We also have a model joining us. Hector's here, and he's going to be showing us and demonstrating a few of those movements that we'll get into a little bit later.
Cool, perfect.
Thanks,
All
enjoy.
right, so guys, thank you. Again, it's a lot of fun to talk about. This is an area where I'm really passionate about because as I've learned about this, I've learned from some excellent mentors, including Gary Gray, Chuck Wolf, Thomas Myers, Michelle Dalcourt. I've had opportunity to study with these individuals. So I've been going down this path for a while to understand that our body has different tissues and how we use the body has an impact on how the tissues get stronger within the body. So when we look at it, these are learning objectives. Like I said, two audiences. One, for you to apply this information for the programs you design for your clients and classes, but also for yourselves. Because if you get injured, you can't work. And for those of us that have done it, it is no fun to teach class with an injury. So we got to be able to learn how to take care of our bodies a little bit better. So our first objective for today is understand the difference between the contractile element and the elastic component of muscle. Because muscle is a couple different types of tissue, and we need to understand how to exercise each one differently. We're going to do a little review of how muscles function to store and release energy. Now, I'm going to be going through a very functional approach to anatomy. We've learned about anatomy one way through certain textbooks, but I'm going through a much different dynamic approach. How our muscles work when we're moving. Because our body, we're meant to move on our feet over the ground. If you want more information on this, you can do a search on the ACE website for functional anatomy. We did a series a few years ago going through the adductors, abdominals, the shoulder. So if you want more information on how our muscles really work and function, then you get in today's webinar, just do a search for functional anatomy and you'll be able to find those resources available to you. Third objective for today is to learn effective training strategies that improve the elasticity of fascia. Because a lot of times when we do strength training exercise with clients, we make the muscle strong. but it's the elastic tissue around the muscle gets injured. That's where strains come from. And if we understand how to increase the elasticity of the fascia, we can reduce the risk of injury from muscle strains. Finally, the fourth objective is you're going to learn a couple ways to design exercise programs that can both improve muscle force output and improve the elastic response of fascia. So let's go ahead and get started. Quick little review. We know this, we're exercise professionals, and even if you're not, this is good information to understand. We have different systems in our body. Our nervous system, the neural system, communicates via electricity. You receive an impulse. Your sensory, your afferent nerve endings will receive an impulse. I'm showing my hand because this is our most immediate impact with the environment around us. Kinesthetic, we have the sight, we can hear, we can taste, we can smell, and we can touch. Those are our sights. That's how we receive information from the environment around us. That's sent through our nervous system to the brain, which determines the response. That's what the nervous system does. It communicates information into the body. The fluid system transmits information around the body. So the fluid system in the blood carries oxygen and nutrients. The lymphatic system keeps the tissues hydrated. The capillaries, the veins, the arteries, they move things throughout the body. The fibrous system is our tissue. It's our muscle, our connective tissue, tendons. Tendons are elastic. Tendons do lengthen and shorten. Ligaments are not designed to lengthen and shorten. Ligaments connect bone to bone. That's why if you get a ligament injury, it can be longer to heal than a strain or a tendon injury, which is more of a pull, and have more blood flow. Ligaments have less blood flow. When we look at these systems, one thing I want you to think about is the body, the way we're built is very much like a machine, very much like a computer. When we look at a computer, when you look at a phone, it's nothing more than a little bit of metal, a little bit of plastic, and a little bit of glass. What makes your phone work is the software. It's the applications that run on the phone. So when we look at the human body, it's the muscles, the skeletal structure, the fibrous system, the fluids in our body. That's all the hardware. What makes the hardware work is the software, the information we upload to it. So when you design an exercise program, what you're doing is you're coming up with a software program to help the machine of the human body move more efficiently. So that's exactly what we're going to go into today, is you're going to learn how to be a software programmer for the human machine. Because anytime you design an exercise or you give a client or a class an exercise, what you're doing is you're uploading a new program into their system. You're trying to get the system run more effectively. Because we understand if we want to move better, if we want to make our bodies look better, we have to move better first. And fascia plays an important role of that. So let's get into it. We're going to start with the fibrous system. Now, I love the reason why we use this picture on this slide is because it shows the tension. The fibrous system communicates via tension in the body. I mentioned that the nervous system communicates via electricity. You have the fluid system communicates via fluids, obviously, that carry hormones and nutrients through the body. But our muscles communicate via force. The fibrous system, the tissues, the bones communicate via force. And that's going to play a huge role in how we train both muscle and fascia. So when you see this picture, this is a great depiction of how the muscles are designed to create tension. Because when muscles create two forces, when muscles shorten, they create a compressive force. When muscles lengthen in response to applied force, they're receiving a tensile force. Those are the two things your muscles do. They lengthen in response to a force, and they shorten to produce a force. And this image gives you a pretty good understanding of how that's applied. So first, we need to understand there are two types of tissue. This picture right here, this is what we normally think of an exercise, right? We normally think of we're lifting a weight. I'm just going to demonstrate. I see this image, and I think of chest press. Demonstrate a chest press. Normally when we think of lifting a weight, that's our contractile element. So when we look at the contractile element of muscle, we have the actin-myosin cross bridges. The actin-myosin are the smallest protein microfilaments in the muscle system. When they receive that signal to contract from the nervous system, they pull across one another to generate a force. That force is then transmitted through the non-contractile element, through the fascia and the elastic tissue. So we know that people come into the gym. Monday's traditional is the International Chest Day. I was going to go American Chest Day, but let's be honest. Monday is International Chest Day. When people come into the gym on a Monday, they think, I'm going to do bench press. They think they're going to work the strength. When you do heavy weights, you're working the contractile element of muscle. What we need to get people thinking about is the next day they come in is fascia day. That's when we train movement. That's when we work on all the tissue that connects one muscle to another. So that brings up the question. We understand what muscle is. We understand that muscle is the force-producing component of what our body does. Now let's take a little bit deeper understanding of what fascia is. This definition was created about 10 years ago in 2007 at the first International Fascia Congress, where a bunch of researchers, a bunch of practitioners got together to start talking about this. And keep in mind, it's only been about the past 20, maybe 25 years, thanks to the work of people like Robert Schleip, Donald Ingber at Harvard. You have Thomas Myers, who's a soft tissue worker. You have Ida Rolf, who really was going down this path a number of years ago. But what we're really doing is understanding there's much more going on in the body than just the muscles. So the definition of fascia is right here on your screen. That's the collagen fiber system. It's the collagenous fibrous connective tissues that can be seen as a body-wide network that transmits tension throughout the entire body. One way to look at this is a concept, something called tensegrity. Tensegrity was a term coined by an architect, Buckminster Fuller. Tensegrity refers to tensional integrity. That's the ability of a structure to support itself with the forces. That's what our body does. Our body distributes and contains forces. Compression is a shortening force, muscles shorten. Tension is a lengthening force, muscles experiencing tensile forces. What communicates that throughout the body is our fibrous network, specifically the collagen-based fascia. So let's get into it and understand it a little bit deeper. When you see the different layers of muscle, now keep in mind, images are one thing. If you really want to have a deeper understanding, that's where you can, cadaver lab is a perfect thing to go through. A few years ago, I was very fortunate to go through a cadaver lab with Thomas Myers, where we really got to take a deep dive in understanding and seeing how fascia was patterned in the body. So when you see how fascia responds to force in the body, it gives you a much better appreciation for how the body actually moves. Now, the one thing that the fascia does is it creates shape for the muscle. When you go all the way down to that individual myofibril, on the right-hand side of your screen, you see that individual muscle fiber. Around every individual muscle fiber is connective tissue. Around every bundle of muscle fibers, what we call fascial, is a connective tissue. Around every large muscle is connective tissue. So connective tissue surrounds everything, even surrounds the bone. The periosteum is a connective tissue around the bone. That's what muscles connect to. And a moment on that, we think of bone. A lot of times, we've seen the plastic skeletons. Maybe we've seen former skeletons. We think of bone as a hard structure. But in the body, in your living body, the bone is actually a soft tissue, a collagen-based tissue. The difference is, bone is built with osteoblasts. Muscles are built with fibroblasts. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes about what that really means. But when you have fascia, fascia really communicates through nerve endings and by transmitting force. So when muscle generates force, so if you look at what a muscle does, I'm just going to point to my biceps for a second. When the muscle shortens within the body, you're creating a compressive force. That compression, that muscle shortening, is pulling on all the fascia around it. So anytime muscles in the body shorten, it creates tension on the surrounding fascia. And that tension is transmitted throughout the body. So if you look at your nervous system communicates via electricity. Your muscular system communicates via force. And that's how we need to approach it when we design exercise programs. Because again, we need to think about our body like we're developing a computer program or like we're writing an app for a phone. Because when we look at the body, we have different components. In your college, or when we look at the fascia, we have different components of fascia. Fascia is comprised primarily of two types of protein. About 80% collagen, give or take, and about a little bit less than 20% elastin. Collagen is a very strong structural fiber. Collagen really does not lengthen and shorten much, but collagen creates rigidity. Collagen in the muscle creates rigidity. Collagen helps create rigidity in the bones. It helps create rigidity in the ligaments. Collagen is very important for the body. It also is what our skin is comprised of largely collagen. Elastin is another component of fascia. Elastin, just like the name suggests, elastin is a more of an elastic protein that lengthens and shortens in response to forces. Another component of fascia is your extracellular matrix, or the ECM. The extracellular matrix is that fluid, contains a lot of water. It contains proteoglycans, which are individual cells, but also contains fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are individual protein cells. Now, what happens when your body receives a force, the body will produce fibroblasts to repair the force on the muscle and the connective tissue. When the bone receives a force, the body will produce osteoblasts to repair the bone. So this is all floating around in our body. That's one of the reasons. If you train people late in the day, if you're going to be exercising yourself late in the day, you're teaching classes in the evening, it's very important to remind people to be hydrated because our tissue works in layers. So we look at how the body works together. We have layers of fascia sliding against each other. That ECM, when that ECM gets dehydrated, it becomes more viscous. It becomes more gooey. It becomes more like layers of Velcro. If we stay well hydrated and keep the hydration going, keep the water going, then allows the layers to slide against each other much easier. So if we have people exercising later in the day or just exercising in general, we need to remind them to stay active with the hydration. Hydrate regularly throughout the day. Now, one other thing about fascia that we've realized the last few years, that's that fascia contains up to 10 times more nerve endings than muscle tissue itself. So think about that. If our job as instructors, as trainers, is to upload data via exercises, now if I have somebody do an isolation exercise, how much data am I uploading? I'm using primarily the muscle. If I have somebody do a lunge to reach exercise, if I have somebody do lunge to reaches where we're lengthening the information, I'm getting more joints involved, I'm getting more connective tissue involved. We're now uploading much more data into the system because we're getting more nerve endings involved. So it's not that one is wrong, one's right, it's just they're different sources of input. So some of our programming needs to be strength because the only way that muscle gets stronger is by generating a force. But if we want to make the fascia stronger, we have to think about how do we move in all planes of motion. That brings us to our proprioceptors because that's what we're doing. When we have people move, we're uploading information in the body. Proprioceptors are how we receive that information. We have a lot of proprioceptors in our joint endings, joint capsule endings. Your hands and feet have the most amount of joints in your body. If you really want to turn on the client's muscles, if you really want to get the muscles engaged, we need to have a client standing on their feet. Because when clients are standing on their feet and they're engaging into the ground, pushing into the ground, if you try that, if you get up wherever you are right now and push your foot into the ground, you'll feel that that turns a lot of muscles on. You have about 28 bones in your foot. Between every bone, you have joints, and every joint has joint capsules. You have ligaments. All these have nerve endings. So if you want to get your body more engaged with any exercise, don't think about contracting the core. Think about pushing the foot into the ground, because pushing the feet into the ground will automatically get things turned on. With your hands have a lot of bones in them. So anytime you're doing something with your hands, have the client grip strongly. If they're holding a weight, if they're holding a kettlebell, a medicine ball, anything that they're holding, sometimes I see clients kind of relaxing their hands a little bit. That means that shoulder's not receiving the information it needs to be safe. So especially when we have clients moving a weight through space, the stronger the grip, everything else turns on. So we can get clients really engaged in their entire body by cueing the feet to push into the floor and by using the hands as strong grips. Those are where a lot of proprioceptors lay. Now we look at different mechanoreceptors. Mechanoreceptors respond to tension, they respond to compression, and they respond to change of position. The two most common ones we see, that we talk about are the muscle spindles. Muscle spindles you see on the screen there, muscle spindles lie parallel to the individual muscle fibers. Muscle spindles sense length change. So when a muscle is being lengthened, it senses that information and it relays that information to the motor unit to create a shortening action. So the spindles create the muscle, they sense length change to create muscle force production. Now the Golgi tendon organ is a little bit different. Golgi tendon organ sense tension in the system. That's why when you hold a stretch, if you hold a static stretch and you can stand up right now, you put one leg back, take your right leg back, do a little hip stretch, you're going to feel a point of tension here. That's where the Golgi tendon organ in that muscle, the hip flexor muscle, is sensing that tension. It's being lengthened and sensing that tension, and after about 30 seconds, it's going to realize it's not in danger of being injured, or your body's not in danger of being injured, and it relaxes that. So when we start moving, we have clients move, when we move, we're sending information into all these proprioceptors. And the more movement we can have clients do, the more information, the more data we're uploading to the system. So now I'm going to talk about how do we strengthen the fascia. Take a look at this slide. This is some of the best exercise that you can do. Gymnastics, martial arts, dance, yoga. Think about body weight movements. If you think about what these individuals do, what they do as athletes, and I classify dancers as athletes, I classify yogis as athletes. They may not be playing a sport with a ball, but they most definitely are athletes. When you look at what they do, they're lengthening the system. Muscle gets stronger, shortening against resistance. Fascia gets stronger, lengthening in response to resistance. So if you look at how a gymnast moves, a gymnast is moving, and when a gymnast is doing a lot of movements, like this is going into a handstand on a pommel horse, you're creating tension throughout the entire network. The hands are gripping the handles, lengthening all the way through the body. That's making the entire system strong. If we're taking this fascia approach to exercise, we need to think about training the body as one single muscle. And that's one way we've been described as one muscle with 600 different pockets. If you read The Endless Web by Fidus and Schultz, it's Fidus and Schultz, I mess that up sometimes, but The Endless Web, they start out pointing out that when the body is first created, we're one cell. We're a one-cell organism. When the sperm meets the egg, we're a one-cell structure, and then we divide out, and we divide out, and we divide out, and we become this body, this being that we are now as a full-grown adult. But we still have to think about that we function as one muscle. We have a number of different pockets based on the connective tissue alignment, but we want to train the system. If we want to help our clients become truly strong, we A, have to help them move better, but B, train them as one entire muscle at a time. And that's where this is an excellent example of that through gymnastics. Now, mechanotransduction, I've already referred to this. When force is applied to the body, it's creating cellular change. So I'm talking about when you introduce an exercise to a client, you're changing the software. You're giving them a new software program to apply. So on one hand, when you're designing an exercise program, you're a computer engineer because you're designing a software program for the hardware of the body to move more efficiently. Another way to think of it is you're a chemical engineer. So if your parents ever wanted you to be an engineer, congratulations. You're a software engineer and you're a chemical engineer, but you're working on the human body. Because when you apply force to the body, there's a chemical response. That's what the term mechanotransduction means. You apply force to the tissue, you damage the muscle tissue. There's a chemical response that's going to produce more fibroblasts to repair the damaged muscle tissue. When you lengthen the fascia, when you lengthen the connective tissue, we want to make sure we lengthen it to the point of mild strain, but we don't overstretch it because that could result in an injury, in a pull injury. But when you strain the fascia, you also get a repair response from the fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are meant to repair the tissue. So that's what we're doing. Anytime we're applying force to the body, we're creating a tissue response of repairing and creating new cells. Now, when we look at Davis's law tells us that soft tissue models along lines of stress. Now, think about the cyclist in this picture here. Cyclist is a very repetitive motion exercise. Many times cyclists are in this position, they're hunched over doing a lot of cycling, a very repetitive motion. If you've been on a bike for 20, 30, 50, 112 miles, and you get up and you start moving, you can feel how your body has to lengthen against that because your connective tissue will adapt that position. That's one of the reasons why we need to have clients move in multiple planes of motion. Because if we just keep them in limited planes of motion or in limited single joint actions, we're not allowing that connective tissue to be strong to handle forces. So a client can be very strong doing regular traditional exercises, but then go to pick up their kid, go to pick up some groceries, and if that connective tissue can't transmit force from one part of the body to the next, that's where we get an injury. That's where we get a muscle pull. That's where we get a damage. Now, kyphotic posture, the reason why that's on there is think about the people in that over-kyphotic posture. People have been at a desk for too long, driving too long. They get stuck in this position. Now, if people hold this position for too long, do you ever remember if you're a kid? I got young kids, and I tell them this sometimes. They'll make a face, and you say, don't make that face. Your face will get stuck in that position. Well, that might not be true with the face, but that is true with your posture. So if your mother always told you to sit up tall for better posture, that's true because if you hold bad posture for too long, the tissue binds down, the collagen binds down, and the muscle won't be able to lengthen and shorten. The osteoblasts in the bone will bind down, and the vertebrae will not be able to straighten up against one another. So people that don't have good posture, if they stay in a misaligned or a maladaptive posture for too long, they can become stuck in that position. Now here's what we want to think about. If you're a trainer or if you're an instructor, you're a software programmer. If I tell a client, if I have a client that's like this, and I say stand up straight, and they can, then that's a matter of a software issue. I need to upload new data into their system so they can hold the hardware better. They can realign their muscles, they can realign the skeletal structures. Now, if somebody's stuck in this position, this kyphotic position, and we say stand up straight and they say I am, that's a hardware issue. The tissues have adapted to this position. We, as trainers and instructors, we don't deal with hardware. Hardware is a medical issue that the medical community deals with. We deal with software. We teach people how to move more effectively. We teach people how to move with more fluidity, more grace, more coordination. So when you think of your job as an instructor, we want to think about, is that a software issue or a hardware issue? Because if it's a hardware issue, it's an injury, we got to refer that out. But if it's a software issue where we can teach people how to move more efficiently, that's definitely within the wheelhouse, and that's something we can do. So when we look at training the fascia, understand that strength training is good. And that's one thing we always have to pay attention to with education like this, is that just because I'm talking about fascia doesn't mean forget it, I'm never doing heavy strength training again. No, it's a balance of everything. We look at strength training is for the contractile element of muscle. If we want to make a muscle stronger, we have to impose a heavier load on it. One of the rules of programming is specific adaptations to impose demands. If we want to make the muscle stronger, we have to use a heavier load. The heavier load will activate more muscle motor units. The muscle motor units are those little spark plugs that get the muscle fibers to contract. The only way to get stronger is to lift heavy. This is a mistake we made many, many years ago with functional training, where we had people stand on all types of balance things using elastic bands. We had people moving, but we weren't introducing a load. So what happened? When certain high-intensity programs came along, people started lifting really heavy loads, but what did they forget? They forgot to move in multiple planes. They forgot to balance. So now we need to merge these ideas together, and we need to have certain days where we do strength training. Strength training, if we follow the ACE-IFT model, strength training is phase 3 load of the ACE-IFT model. That's when we're doing muscle force production. Muscle force production is based on motor unit recruitment. If the heavier load we use, the more muscle motor units get recruited. The more muscle motor units recruited, the more muscle fibers activated. The more muscle fibers activated, the more muscle protein damage. That creates a repair process, and we can see how that works. So when we have people generate force, like in this slide you see there, you see that picture? That's getting ready for a shoulder press. If we generate force, we generate a concentric compressive force against the external resistance. The resistance comes from gravity, but we're creating muscle force to overcome that resistance. We need strength training to get the muscles stronger. But then when it comes to strength training for fascia, fascia is where we go into lighter resistance. Now keep in mind, this is something interesting that I've gotten from a colleague, Michelle Dalcourt. When we look at the gym is the only place we go where we pick something up and we set it right back down. If you're at home, if you're working with someone who works for, they're an industrial, if they work in industrial labor, if they're a tradesman, when we look at what people do at work, when you pick something up at work, you're carrying it somewhere. When you pick something up at home, like a basket of laundry, or pick your kid up to put your kid to bed, you're carrying something somewhere. But what do we do in the gym? The gym, we pick something up and set it down. When we do that, when we use weight in just one plane of motion, we're working on the contractile element. When we start carrying a load through gravity, now we're working all the connective tissue that connects all the muscles to one another. So if we want to train our fascia, if we want to train our connective tissue, we need to look at lengthening under resistance. We want to create that tensile force. Muscle fibers get stronger, generating and create a compressive force against resistance. Fascia and connective tissue get stronger by responding, by lengthening against resistance. So we need to look at how do we create a tensile force? How do we lengthen that tissue? If we lengthen this tissue, what we're going to do is allow more collagen and elastin to build into that so the tissue becomes more resilient and more resistant to injury. And we'll go into a few exercise demonstrations today. So first, talked about this a little bit. These are some examples of what we can use. If we're working on the contractile element, I'm going to use weights. I'm going to use a weighted bar or barbell, heavy dumbbells. But you're generating a force in a linear path of motion. If I'm training fascia, I'm going to use lighter implements, a medicine ball, a sand bell, maybe a Viper Pro. I'm using a lighter resistance, but I'm moving, having a client move through space. This is great for if you work as an instructor, as a trainer, and you want to avoid injury, do some lightweight training, moving through space. That'll help your body become more resistant against injuries. Some programs that are out there, some pre-choreographed programs, pre-designed programs are very linear. We need to be able, if you want to avoid injury, you need to be able to move light loads through space to keep your body injury-free, make your body really strong. So before we get into strengthening fascia, we need to talk about warming it up. Now, we've already done a live webinar on this. Sam Berry did a phenomenal job of going through recovery strategies. Using a foam roller like this is great for working on the fascia. The friction of the foam roller on the tissue, the friction creates heat. The heat allows the layers of fascia to slide against one another. Another benefit of using a foam roller or using some type of rolling device is you're moving fluid through the body. Remember that the extracellular matrix is mostly water. It's about 70–80% water, give or take. So if we put pressure on that, we're moving fluid through the body. So when you're using a foam roller, you're increasing tissue temperature, you're moving fluid around, but what you're also doing is you're stimulating the nerve endings in the fascia. We have a couple articles. If you do a search on the ACE website for foam rollers, you'll see a couple articles that have been produced about that, and you get a little more information about that. But if I want to help a client get really warmed up and ready to move in multiple directions with a light resistance, I want to use some type of rolling device. I want to use, whether it's a stick, a foam roller, or a ball, but something to create friction on the fascia in order to create more motion in the fascia. Now, I'm going to go through one model of fascial lines. I want to acknowledge there are a couple different models out there. Some of the sources that I've used, and I've referenced, I've done a little education with Thomas Myers. Thomas Myers in his book Anatomy Trains gives you an excellent example of 12 fascial lines in the body. And he just goes through his definition of fascial lines, of how all the tissues connect to one another, via very specific methodology. The example we're going to use today is from Andre Vleeming. He's a physiologist and a physical therapist out of Europe. We use this in the medical exercise specialist. So if you want a little bit more information on this, the medical exercise specialist certification of ACE has that information, and the MES textbook has that information as well. But Vleeming came up with 4 subsystems, or 4 slings of muscle tissue. And that's the example I'm going to use today. Doesn't mean that Myers is wrong. It doesn't mean that Vleeming is right. It's just different models. And the way I teach this is it's much easier. If you can understand how these 4 slings or these 4 subsystems work, then when you get to Myers' methodology of the 12 fascial lines, it's going to make a lot more sense to you. Because sometimes when we start counting, when I taught my kids how to count, we had to count to 3 before we could count to 10. So what we're going to work on today is we're going to work on 4 slings. If you can understand these 4 slings and how these 4 slings transmit force throughout the fascial lines in the body, then by the time you start reading Myers and other models out there, it'll make more sense and you can follow it along. So the first sling we're going to talk about is your posterior oblique sling. And the reason why I chose this is the easiest one to see. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have Hector join me real quick. This is Hector. And Hector is going to just demonstrate real quick. Let me have you turn around, face the back, and I'm going to use this handy dandy little band. Now keep in mind that when we move, fascia lengthens and it shortens. Fascia is very elastic. So I'm going to have Hector go into a stance. Take that right step forward, that left arm forward. If we want to understand anatomy, we want to understand what muscles do while we're walking. So when we look at this is our posterior oblique sling, right? This is our glute and this is our lat dorsi. The lat dorsi goes from underneath the humerus and it comes down here into the thoracolumbar fascia. That's just connective tissue right over the lumbar spine. The gluteus maximus comes all the way up from the IT band and attaches right here at the top of the pelvis. So when these are lengthened, when we're walking and that arm swings forward and that leg swings forward, it lengthens the sling. So take a step forward to shorten. Now, these are lengthened. This side is lengthened. So what we're doing is we're lengthening to shortening. This is our posterior oblique sling. If you can get that, if you kind of understand that concept, you'll really be able to start seeing this in action. I'm going to bring you back out here in a minute. So we want to think about that is we want to think about how we use the entire body together. And the other thing that I really want you to think about is understand what muscles do in gait. So when we go through some of these movements today, these movements don't necessarily replicate gait, but our body is designed to walk. We learn to walk when we're about somewhere between 10 and 14 months old. The first progression is we extend the spine. The second progression is we roll over. The third progression is being able to sit up, crawl, we can pull ourselves up and walk. It takes the human being about 12 months to learn how to stand on 2 feet. It takes 12 months to develop that strength, that integration of all of our network. It takes a 4-legged animal a matter of minutes or hours in order to be able to handle gravity. That's because when we're walking, our spine is upright against gravity and we need all that control. So with the programs that you want to design for clients and classes, we need to take that in mind. You need to think about how does gravity impact the body. So if you can see this sling, I'm keeping it up on the screen, if you can see that sling and see how the lat dorsi connects with the glutes, that's going to give you a good idea for how it all works together. So Hector, what I'm going to have you do is bring back out. These are the 3 examples of what were the 3 exercises we're going to do. The first exercise I'm going to have you do is, remember, we want to lengthen and strengthen, is I want you to do a lunge to cross-body reach. So I'm going to have you turn this way. I'm going to have you do a reverse lunge. Take about a step back if you don't mind. So I'm going to have him do a reverse lunge and then reach with your right arm across the body and come back up. Let me have you keep doing that while I keep talking. First of all, I want to say thank you to Hector. It's not easy to do to go through these exercises, and he's doing a phenomenal job. One thing about the lunges, I'm having him lunge backwards because a lot of people don't have the hip mobility or the ankle mobility. When they lunge forward, that knee slides too far forward. It's not the knee issue, it's a hip or an ankle issue. By lunging backwards, he's putting more force back into the hip, so he's automatically lengthening the glutes. And by doing this reverse lunge to cross-body reach, I'm going to have him, do it one more time. So now reverse lunge, reach across with the right arm. Pause for a second here. You can see here, this fold in the shirt is pretty much how your lat dorsi is lengthened. If you can see the glute, that glute's being lengthened, it's being flexed and internally rotated. And come up, do about 2 more reps each side. So this reverse lunge to cross-body reach, if you're holding something like a bar or a Viper, he could add a little bit of leverage to that and add a little bit more force to that. But what we're doing is we're connecting the hips and shoulders together via lengthening that tissue. Now I'm going to have him do a lateral lunge to cross-body reach. So let me have you step in front of me a little bit. I'm going to have you lunge to your right and with your left hand reach across your body. Now what you're seeing, and bring it back, is you're creating, when he motions, when those shoulders rotate over that right hip, pause for a second, we're creating internal rotation here. So that hip is flexed in the sagittal plane and we're creating internal rotation in the transverse plane. That lengthens all that tissue and bring it back. And when he's reaching across his body, he's creating length from that lat all the way down here and bring it back. So if he had light dumbbells, if you had a light dumbbell and you're reaching for the outside of your knee or reaching for your foot. So the next one, Hector, let me have you come up and reach down like you're reaching for your foot. So if you had a light dumbbell, we're now lengthening all that tissue. And by reaching forward, I'm fine. As long as the motion comes from the hip first, I'm fine with him moving that spine around a little bit. And I'm not going to have him use a heavy load until I make sure he can do that movement. Now what I want to do, I want them to see what it looks like from this side. So maybe turn around and go to your right side so we can see. So go same side. Now what you're seeing, what I want you to pay attention to is watch the folds in the shirt. That's the lat. That's how the lat works together. So we can see it lengthening and come back up. That's perfect. Now the final one, and this is not going to be an easy one. Let me have you turn and face the wall. This is a single leg RDL. Now before he does this, remember if I have him hold a light weight here, I'm going to get his lat and his hips working. So let's try this. Keep your left leg planted. Try to point the right leg. Just hinge forward. And what he's doing, he's connecting that lat and that hip together and come up nice and slow. Now the trick here is with this exercise is using this left leg. Is point your left leg, create tension in the left leg, creates more stability on that right hip. Now let's bring it up and do that one more time. That looks awesome, man. Keep that right foot planted in the ground. Remember, if we want stability, plant that right foot into the ground, create tension here by lengthening that leg. He's doing a phenomenal job. And bring it up and relax. That's perfect, man. Thank you very much. We'll come back. We'll have you come back out here in a minute. But those three exercises, the lunge to crossbody reach, a lateral lunge to crossbody reach, those crossbody reaches, we're creating motion between the hips and the shoulders. When we create motion between the hips and the shoulders, we're creating length in the tissue. Creating length is the best way to strengthen our fascia and connective tissue. That single leg RDL was very tough, but it's connecting the hips to the shoulder. Keep in mind, when we walk, walking is a transition. Walking, we go from a split squat to a single leg lunge. Walking, we go from a split squat to a single leg lunge. So we have a little bit of a hip hinge. When the arm is swinging forward, it's doing a little bit of a push movement. When the arm is swinging back, it's doing a little bit of a pull movement. So all 5 movements, our 5 basic patterns of movement are hip hinge or squat, single leg like a lunge or a step up, pushing, pulling, and rotation. We do all 5 patterns when we walk. That's why in order to have really effective exercise programs, we want to have a movement approach patterning. We want to have a movement pattern approach towards designing exercises. Because muscles don't work in isolation, our brain is programmed to work in patterns and work in coordination. So if we can understand that, the next 3 slings, well, you'll see how it comes into place. So this next sling is our anterior oblique subsystem, or our anterior oblique sling. If you're watching this, wherever you are, if you can stand up, and I want to tell you something. When I was learning this stuff a number of years ago, you would have seen me walking home in Washington, D.C. I'd been walking home from the gym. I'd have been putting my hands all over my body because I was reading Chuck Wolf. I was reading stuff from Gary Gray. And in order to learn of it, you have to apply it. But when you look at this, if you stand up nice and tall and you put your hand here, this is your right hand from your rib cage down to the top of your shorts or your pants. That's your external oblique. Normally when we think about training our obliques, we lie on the ground and we roll around like a turtle stuck on its shell. That's not using the body the way it's designed to work. So we have our external oblique here, we have our internal oblique right here. So the internal oblique is coming down from the back of the rib cage to the top of the pelvis. When you move, your external oblique, this side external oblique, works with the opposite, the contralateral side internal oblique. The external oblique and the opposite or contralateral internal oblique work together. That external oblique bleeds down to the adductors. Now the adductor group, the most common way we exercise the adductors is by doing this, right? But we want to think about how does the body work when we walk. We don't walk by bringing our leg across the midline of the body. That's a very inefficient way to walk. We walk when the leg is forward, the adductors are lengthened to pull the leg back into extension. When the leg is back, the adductors are lengthened to pull the leg into flexion. So when we walk, it's the adductors creating a lot of that propulsion in gait. If you look at a gait analysis, you look at muscle activity during gait, the adductor magnus has the highest level of activity during the gait cycle. The only time the adductor magnus is quiet during gait is when the foot's underneath the center of gravity and when there's actually no force being applied to it. Otherwise, when you're walking, that adductor magnus is going to extend the hip or the adductor magnus flexes the hip. So when we look at the anterior oblique sling, we need to think about ways that we can be on our feet, pushing and pulling to create stability through the midsection. The best way to train the core is train the core on our feet. Use the gravity. Gravity's pushing us down, ground reaction force is pushing us up. If we lay down on the ground, as soon as we lay down on the ground, we get a little parasympathetic overdrive. The parasympathetic nervous system puts us to sleep. So the parasympathetic nervous system is our rest and digest. If we start standing on our feet, it creates sympathetic drive. Sympathetic is the fight or flight system. So to work this sling, what we're going to do, and again, we can't isolate. These are just exercises that integrate these different lines of fascia and lines of muscle together to get them working in a more coordinated fashion. These are the 3 exercises we're going to do. We're going to do rotation medicine ball lifts. We're going to do a lunge with overhead reach. And keep in mind, when I think lunge, I'm thinking reverse lunge, going back into the hip, not forward into the knee, but back into the hip. And then we'll do a transverse plane lunge because that's really where you lengthen the tissue. So we're going to bring Hector back on out. I'm going to grab my little medicine ball here. Well, to be honest, it's not little, so Hector's going to have to be lifting 12 pounds. So keep your feet wide. What I'm going to do is go from right foot, so keep your right foot a little bit further forward, Hector. And now I want you to go from your left hip to your right shoulder and let your left foot turn towards me. Good. Keep doing that. I want you to rotate your left foot and your left hip towards me. Now, what I'm doing by giving him that direction, that's an external focus of cueing. I'm not telling him to internally rotate the hip because he doesn't know what that means. But I'm going to have him rotate his hip towards me. That gives him an external focus. But keep doing that. You're doing it perfect right here. But what he's doing now is external and internal oblique. So his left side external oblique is working with his right side internal oblique, and his adductor magnus on the right side is keeping him steady. So let's go the other direction now. So take your left foot forward a little bit. Now go right hip and rotate that right foot away from me. So again, I want that cue to be directional, not rotating the hip. I want to rotate the hip away from me. And what I'm doing is creating length. Not only am I creating length in the obliques, but I'm also creating length here in that posterior oblique sling that we already talked about. We're creating length through the lats and through the glutes by moving the weight through space and instead of moving the weight just up and down. Now what I'm going to have you do is reverse lunge to overhead lift. So turn and face this way. I want you to do a reverse lunge, keep those arms straight, and pick it right up. So now what you can see, the external and internal obliques are now creating more stability and stand it up. What I'm having them do is use those adductors. By doing this move, we're creating length. So by taking those arms overhead, we're lengthening the external and internal obliques. By stepping back, we're lengthening those adductor muscles. So we're creating length in the system. We're also creating more communication between the shoulders and hips. So if he goes out to play basketball with his friends, if he goes to play with kids, he's going to be much more resistant against injury because now we have all the connective tissue between all the muscles working together. So that's a reverse lunge overhead lift. Now the last one I'm going to have you do, let's come up here and I'm going to have you do that transverse plane. So you're going to keep your left foot point straight ahead. I want you to step back and point your right foot towards that wall. So again, I'm giving him directional cues and just at the bottom, lift it right here. That's it. Lift up. And no, not even a step. That's great. This is what he's doing. He's going to a really big range of motion. But if we start doing this stuff with clients, we want to start with smaller ranges of motion. So do me a favor. That's perfect. Just step to about where you're going to hit my foot. Perfect. And then take it up overhead. I want him to start in a smaller range of motion because when we do this, we're creating length in the tissues. That's going to create the DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness, because some of these tissues have not been lengthened this way before. I can guarantee you that left leg adductor probably hasn't felt forces like this in a long time, if ever at all. But as he's stepping this way, he's creating a lot of length to that left leg adductor. We're getting the external and internal obliques working together to create stability as those arms going overhead. And you can see how we're tying everything in. So let's give it one more. There we go. He goes into a nice bigger step. So he's working into the range of motion. Now look at all the information, all the data I'm uploading into his system. If I had him just doing a single plane motion, that's not that much information going into the body. But by doing this transverse plane with an overhead lift, we're getting a lot of different information. That's perfect. So you can see how that's working. Yeah, he needs to get a little bit of breather. But what I wanted you to see is how we do that. We're connecting the hips and the shoulders. We're using those slings. There's that anterior oblique sling. We have the external oblique, internal oblique, adductors working together. That controls motion. So again, we can't isolate the sling, but we can pick exercises or movements that will use those muscles in one line of force. Now, the next sling that we'll look at is a longitudinal sling. Now, we've been talking about moving in a multiplanar environment. We know, let's go back to gait. We know that a lot of exercise, if we look at traditional exercise selection, we know that a lot of exercises are sagittal plane dominant. Sagittal plane is when we flex and extend primarily. We're moving in this plane of motion. Frontal plane is when we AB and AD duct and we move in this plane of motion. But when we walk, our hips and shoulders rotate, they counter-rotate in the transverse plane. The longitudinal axis of the body goes from the top of the head all the way to the floor. The longitudinal axis of the body is the axis of rotation for the transverse plane. So when we have clients walking, they're getting that transverse plane rotation around the longitudinal axis. So the longitudinal sling is that axis of rotation for the shoulders and the hips. Now the important thing to realize is this sling goes up both legs of the body. We're showing one leg in the image just because that's easier to understand, but it goes up both slings. Now, the important thing is that it includes both the peroneus and the anterior tibialis. The peroneus longus is on the outside of the lower leg. The anterior tibialis is on the front of the lower leg. Now, the important thing about that is they both connect at the same spot on the foot. Both the peroneus longus and the anterior tibialis connect at the same spot, the navicular bone, right in the medial longitudinal arch of the foot. Now, if you stand up nice and tall and keep your feet neutral and you rotate, if I rotate this way, I can feel my foot pick up. So if we rotate and we create supination, the peroneus longus and anterior tibialis are creating rigidity in the arch of the foot. That creates stability for propulsion when we're walking. So we understand that this system connects our feet all the way to our shoulders. We can train the entire system to be more effective at creating tension. So we start with the peroneus longus and anterior tibialis that rolls up through the back of the leg and the biceps femoris. Now keep in mind, the biceps femoris, when we're walking, helps extend. The biceps femoris helps extend the hip. And a lot of times when we train the hamstrings, we work on muscle shortening. If we only focus on muscle shortening, then a client goes out to do a dynamic motion, maybe play soccer, play tennis. They're putting a lot of eccentric, a lot of lengthening loads into that. It can be pretty easy to see how we get a hamstring pull. So it goes from the bicep femoris all the way up through the spinal erectors, through the erector spinae, all the way to the base of the skull. That creates rigidity along the longitudinal axis rotation so the body can move easier in the transverse plane. So again, we want to lengthen to strengthen the fascia. Lengthen to strengthen the fascia. We want to strengthen the contractile element, we use a heavy load. With fascia, we use a little bit of a lighter load. The exercise we're going to go through are B skips. You'll see Hector demonstrate that. The thing about the B skip is you're extending that hamstring. You're extending that hamstring into rapid force production to load more force into the tissue. You're going to lunge to a forward reach and kettlebell swing. So Hector, let me have you come back out here, face the wall. No, come back out here, face the wall. Then I'm going to have you do those B skips in place. So skip in place and kick. So B skips are kicking and skipping. You're doing this with little kicks. You're doing a skip and kicking the leg. Look at how that's putting a lot of force into the hamstrings. So we're lengthening all that fascia from the hamstring and the gastroc. And relax for a second. One of the things about strengthening fascia is we want to be rhythmic. So face the wall. Now do like you're doing hamstring curls. Just humor me for a second. Just pick up the leg and the hamstring. Now traditional hamstring curls, seated, lying down, standing up. What we're using the muscle. We're using the contractile element to generate force against the resistance. Now, if he went out and he started trying to run, if he was going to play soccer, if he was going to coach his kids' team, play tennis with a coworker or a neighbor, if you're going to try to run and generate a lot of force, he's not going to get it. The connective tissue doesn't know how to handle that force. Let's go back and do the B skips. So the B skips are now teaching that connective tissue how to handle those higher levels of force, and he's going to be more injury resistant if we add some of this dynamic lengthening into his exercise program. That's perfect. Now the next exercise I'm going to keep you facing the same way is a forward lunge, an anterior lunge to forward reach. So I want you to lunge and reach down like you're tying your shoe. Again, external focus. I'm giving him something to focus on a movement position and come back. External focus. Keep that back heel down, so reach forward. With the back heel down, we're lengthening all the way through the gastroc. So we look at this. I'm going to grab our handy little elastic here. Keep going. I'm going to pause right here. So go reach down like you're touching your toes. We're getting the hamstrings lengthened. We're getting the gastroc lengthening. So we're creating the lengthen. So we're strengthening all that fascia around it. Let's go about 3 or 4 more. And if you want to make that load a little bit greater, if we want to increase that load, reach out in front of your knee this time. So now we're increasing that lever length. By increasing the lever length, we're putting more force into the body. Now, one note about this motion is I'm having him move from the hips first. So when he steps forward, when he does that little forward step, I'm going to have him move from the hips first. Let's try this. I'm going to have you demonstrate this with a reverse lunge. So now do a reverse lunge with a forward reach. So now I'm going to go that reverse lunge. So now you can see how much more greater range of motion he's going to get. By doing this reverse lunge, now we're getting a lot of lengthening. But pay attention, as he comes up, he's using that hamstring. When the feet are on the ground in closed chain, that hamstring helps extend the knee. So let me have you try that. As you pull yourself up, think about pulling that knee back. Perfect. As you pull yourself up, think about pulling that knee back. Now I'm getting that connective tissue to help do what that muscle does in function when he's walking or running. And relax. Now finally, the last one I'm going to have him demonstrate is a kettlebell swing. Keep in mind that we did a live webinar on the kettlebell swing a couple months ago, so we go through the whole mechanics of that. Now let me have you keep your feet wide, hinge, and explode. So now we're going dynamic force production. Just like the B skips, we're looking at lengthening to shortening. Push those hips back, snap those hips forward. Hips back, snap forward. We're getting rapid lengthening to the hamstrings, rapid lengthening through the spinal erectors. Give me 3 more. Rapid lengthening the gastroc, 2 more. Good, 1 more. Perfect, and relax. So those 3 exercises are great. You guys get a little bit of water, man. You're doing awesome. Appreciate it. So those 3 exercises are perfect for that posterior sling. What we're trying to do, anytime we flex forward, we're creating length in that sling to hold us upright against gravity. And that's one thing I think about. I know there are different models of, we have anterior or upper cross syndrome. When I see somebody with upper cross syndrome, I think they can't decelerate gravity. Gravity's pulling them forward and gravity's kicking their bottom. So I need to train people to have a strong posterior chain or have a strong longitudinal sling so they can stand up tall and decelerate the forces of gravity. So those are our first 3 slings. This is our last sling here, our lateral subsystem, our lateral sling. Now, just like your adductors, we think about training the adductors like this, moving the foot across the midline of the body. We don't train our abductors like this because we don't walk like this. Always take it back to how do our muscles work when we walk. When we walk, when our foot is planted on the ground, your glute medius, the gluteus medius, controls motion of the pelvis on the femur. The opposite side, quadratus lumborum, controls that lateral stability of the pelvis. Your adductor magnus works with the glute medius to control motion of the leg with the foot on the ground. So a lot of runners, a lot of people that might be training for a marathon or might be training for ultra endurance races, they might have knee pain because their knee collapses in. That doesn't have anything to do with the knee. The knee is stuck between the foot and the hip. So there's something going on in the knee. We need to look up above or look down below. So by doing a single leg exercise where we balance on a single leg, we can strengthen that glute medius, that gluteus medius, to control motion of the femur relative to the pelvis. That's how we want to think about it. So again, if we're doing this, we want to create length through this. So I'm going to have Hector come back out one more time. These are the 3 exercises. 1 are carry. So I'm going to have Hector pick up the kettlebell. He's going to turn around. Now, normally I don't like to have him put his back to the camera, but I'm going to have you walk away and then turn around and walk back. When he's doing a kettlebell carry, he has to maintain a tall posture. So keep your posture nice and tall and pause right here for a second. So with the weight on this side of his body, the muscles here have to keep him a lot more stable. The glute medius here is keeping that leg stable. The quadratus lumborum here is keeping that pelvis stable, and the adductors on the back are keeping them stable. So especially if you work with some older adults, just go back and down and back one more time. If you work with older adults, having them carry weights, just walking back and forth in the gym can be a great way because you cannot carry a weight in poor posture. It's really difficult to do. So by carrying a weight, you're having them work in a tall posture and getting all those muscles to work together to stabilize the spine. So now we're going to get rid of the kettlebell, get it out of the way. But to understand that carrying an asymmetrical load is a great way to really strengthen the body, especially in the frontal plane. So now if you take a step forward, now this exercise, I like having people do lunges to balance because the lunge to balance means you have to really strengthen the entire body. So I'm going to have you lunge to your right and come up and balance on your left hip. As you do this, push your left foot into the ground and squeeze that left glute. So let's go. Nice and steady. So think about all this force coming up. That hip is working, the glute medius is working. As he's coming up, if he had a weight in his right hand, he'd be working a lot harder. That quadratus lumborum, going from the spine to the pelvis, is working. Give me 2 more repetitions. You're doing an awesome job, Hector. Thank you. Stand up, push that foot in the ground. Perfect. 1 more, so we can see how this works. And relax. That's the lateral lunge to balance. Now let me have you do this. We didn't practice, but let me do a reverse lunge to balance. Yeah, I'm throwing one at him here. Now balance, same pattern, just a different plane of motion, but we're still working on that glute medius. We're still working on those adductors. So balance exercises are great for developing stability and strength in that lateral sling. Great job, man. And we didn't practice that, so you reacted awesome to that. The final exercise, I'm going to have you take about a half a step forward. This is what we call a sword draw. So just keep both feet on the ground. The sword draw is great. It brings the weight across the body, come out into the arm. And what this is doing is we're working on that nice tall posture. We're working on the posterior deltoids. We're working on the upper portion of that posterior oblique sling, which is the lat and the glute. But if I want to make this more of a lateral subsystem challenge, I'm going to have them balance on that left leg. So you can balance on that left leg. If you need a toe touch with that right foot, feel free. Push your left foot into the ground. Squeeze that left glute. Squeeze your left thigh. Keep your spine tall. And look at this. As that weight comes out here, all of his strength is being generated by that glute medius. And this is not easy, folks. You can try this sometime. Next time you're in the gym, give me 1 more. Pause. And he's creating a lot of lateral stability and relax. Excellent job, man. Hector, you did awesome. I appreciate that. That really is not easy. If you look at that, we're taking that weight out to the side. That hip, a lot of that stability needs to come from the hips. So again, that's a thought process of training the fascia. These are a few simple things we can look at. These are guidelines developed by Robert Schleip. He has an excellent book on the topic. But number one is hydrate. Fascia contains extracellular matrix. Extracellular matrix is mostly water. That's where we have individual protein cells, floating around in it that become the fibroblasts that really help create the new tissue. So when we're doing this, especially if you're going to have a client do a lot of movement, multiplanar movement with resistance, have them hydrate before the workout program. We want to create length in the tissue. If you notice, the one thing about a lot of these exercises is we're creating length. We're lengthening the tissue. We do not use a lot of resistance. If you want a resistance is strength training for the contractile element. We use a much smaller range of motion. But if we're training fascia, we're lengthening through the entire tissue. Start with small movements. I had Hector start here. He went big to start, but normally I would have people start small to introduce that motion. Because the fascia has not moved in that range of motion before, if the joints have not moved in that range of motion before, the tissues have not experienced those forces. So DOMS doesn't only apply to muscle. Delayed onset muscle soreness can happen to the connective tissue and fascia as well. So start with small movements to build up tolerance and then move out to bigger movements. Rhythmic movements, that's where the skips came in. So having them do the B skips, we're getting into a rhythm. Jumping rope, you get into a rhythm. Sprinting, you get into rhythm. Dance, you get into rhythm. Martial arts katas. Rhythmic movements, you're loading force consistently into the system. And fascia training should start 2 days a week and can progress to 3. A lot of times with exercise, we think if a little bit is good, more is better. But just like muscles, your fascia needs recovery as well. So that gives us this little model that we can follow. So we get we get splits from the bodybuilding world. We might do chest on one day, and then while the chest muscles are recovering, we might do back. But we want to think about doing splits like this. One day we do high force production. In the ACE-IFT model, the integrated fitness training model, phase 1 is stability mobility training. That's using a lot of isometric contraction for low force producing movements to enhance stability and create more mobility in the body. Phase 2 is where movement. We're doing those 5 basic patterns, integrating stability and mobility. Phase 3 is load. Load is now we're generating muscle force. Phase 4 is performance. That's where we add force with velocity. For endurance, we generate force and we maintain that velocity for an extended period of time. For power, it's a lot of force in a very short period of time. But those are just a quick little overview of the 4 phases. So one day of the training program of a 3-day training cycle, we want to have be your heavy force production day. You can do isometric contractions for stability, or you can use heavy weights to work on the contractile element to generate more force. You're trying to increase motor unit output, motor unit force output. Day 2 is where we add movement. Phase 2 is movement. That's where we move in all planes of motion in those 5 basic patterns: hip hinge, lunge, push, pull, and rotation. We can add a light weight into that, and that's where we bridge the gap between phase 2 and 3, which is movement and load. But that's where we do low intensity loads. The greater the range of motion in the movement, the smaller the resistance should be. I'll say that again. It's a good general guideline. The greater the range of motion, the smaller the amount of resistance. As people build up, they can gradually add resistance. So day 1, heavy force production. Day 2, light force production, moving all planes of motion. That could be a great day to do a martial arts class. It could be a great day to do a Zumba class. Just move the body. Do yoga because you're moving the body in all planes and you're trying to lengthen that tissue as it moves. Finally, day 3 is energy system training. We can do high intensity interval training for our short-term immediate energy pathway, or we can do steady state endurance training for our long-term aerobic pathway. But that gives you a program. So that way, 2 days a week, people are doing strength training. 2 days a week, people are doing movement training. Training the fascia by moving in all planes, creating length in the system. And 2 days a week, they're doing some type of energy system. They're doing some type of metabolic conditioning, either high intensity anaerobic or low intensity aerobic steady state, or somewhere in between. That gives you a pretty good model. Finally, at least 1 day a week should be a full recovery day. Hang out, watch Netflix, watch Amazon, allow the body to rest and recover, go out and visit some friends, stay away from the gym, and just take it easy for that day. You want to stay active, but you don't need to exercise every day, because when we exercise, we're putting stress on the body. When we have our clients exercise, we're introducing stress to our client's body, and we need to teach them that recovery is an appropriate part of exercise. So with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us. I want to thank the American Council on Exercise for inviting me to be in here and share this information with you. Please check out these references. We have a few articles on fascia. If you search fascia, if you search Train the Fascia Network, you'll see a few articles that we produced over the years on the subject. One was just released in last month's issue of ACE Certified, so that's really up to date with a lot of these resources. But if you look at that first one, if you really want to understand how the body moves during gait, that first one by James Earls is awesome. You have Myers in there, Schleip. I highly recommend it. If you want to take a deeper dive, those are great references for that. So with that, I think Jackie's going to come back out here, and if there are any questions, we can take a moment and enjoy them.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Pete, very much. That was a lot of great information in a very short period of time. I know we could probably spend another 5 or 6 hours,
easily.
Right? On this topic.
Easily.
Yeah.
As you can tell, I'm excited. I enjoy this.
We'll take the rest of the day. So great job, Hector. He's over here recovering and hydrating.
I threw one or two at him sorry about that, but he did an awesome job.
Yes, great job. So we do have a little bit of time for questions. If you would like to type your question into your YouTube chat bar, feel free and do that now, and we'll take a few minutes for questions here in just a second. If you would like to connect with Pete, he's going to be joining us for a live Facebook chat here in just a little while. Over the next couple of days, if you'd like to type in your question on our ACE Fitness Facebook page, you can do so there, and he'll be answering a few more questions.
And just a note on that, Jackie, what I did, I've already videoed a couple of exercises that I'm going to throw up on Instagram a little bit later today. So for viewers, if you're seeing this, I'm going to throw a few things up on my Instagram feed that give you a little bit better detail that we didn't go into here. Just give you a little bit different idea about the application, but just to share more information.
Yeah, there you go. So up on the screen is Pete's contact information, so you can connect with him on Instagram and Twitter and get some more information there, and then also join us for that Facebook chat on our ACE Fitness Facebook page. If you would like to receive more information and continuing education on the topic of fascia, ACE does have a variety of other courses, and as Pete mentioned, some other resources like our certified that can give you a little bit more information about this topic as well. So take a look at those courses, and we'll be taking a few questions here. So some of the questions that did come in, we talked about the rhythm. You mentioned that fascia and training fascia is important to do it in a rhythmic method. And the kind of tempo that we trained with Hector today was pretty slow and controlled for the most part. So talk to us a little bit about the tempo of that rhythm and how it might affect the fascia.
Well, that's good, because a lot of times when we go to slower, if you do slow movement slower, you're really engaging the contractile, because that's where we get like slow motion training, is you're keeping that contractile element under resistance longer, the time under tension. And so by introducing the movements at a relatively slow tempo, I'm introducing that pattern. What I'm doing is I'm uploading that information, that data to his system. The more that Hector does that, the quicker the body's going to respond, because the nervous system now recognizes, the motor units now recognize that pattern. The sensory units, okay, now we know to do that. So like where I had Hector start relatively slow today, over time, I'm gonna have him keep relatively light, but I'm gonna move at a relatively faster pace, because also this can become cardiorespiratory as well. This isn't just training fascia, but if I have him do a multiplanar sequence, lunge forward, lunge lateral, lunge in the transverse plane with minimal rest in between, we're going to increase his metabolic rate and increase his overall energy expenditure. So the idea is we start slow to introduce the movement, introduce that length to the tissue, but as a person learns the patterns, as our client learns the patterns, then we can increase the speed, increase the pace of movement.
Great, perfect. So integrating it as the client, as their body is adapting and safely kind of progressing from there.
And I've used these in classes. When I've used these in classes, I'll go through and we'll go through the first part of class, we'll do reverse lunges, then we'll do lateral lunges, and then we'll do transverse plane lunges. But then by the end of class, we start sequencing them all together. Rest intervals go away. And so that last 8-10 minutes of class, people are sweating, moving in all planes of motion. That's the way we can put it in that format.
So that actually kind of is a good segue for one of the other questions that was brought up. A couple people, thank you for typing in your question. A couple people talked and wondered about incorporating this kind of training as part of the warm-up, and how you incorporate it as part of the warm-up and then kind of feed it through the rest of the class. So you sort of just mentioned about that. Maybe we train it with a little bit lighter weight or no weight at the beginning as part of the warm-up, and then progress using tempo or other external loads.
And that's exactly it. And one of my, it's funny because I'll teach classes sometimes where it might be called core training, but when we start, we're going to stand balance on one leg, and I might have us start reaching out in multiple planes with a foot. That builds into a lunge. So by just doing a single foot reach, I'm now warming up the system. So now when we start lunging, the tissues are ready to go into that. Then by the end of class, especially if it's one of the first few times I'm teaching this, I'm not having him use any weight, but I'm increasing that speed of movement, I'm increasing that pace. But I build this, if I'm doing a traditional strength training class, I would still build it into a warm-up, move in multiple planes of motion. That's where reaches come in really handy. That's what I learned by studying with Gary Gray. But when you study with Gary, you learn that just reaching across the body creates length in the system. And when you create length in the system, that's where you're loading the tissue. And so if I'm doing a traditional weight training class, I might start with some multiplanar reaches, step and reaches, but that's just going to warm the tissue up. So when we start grabbing the heavier weights, everything's firing and
You're
ready to
ready
rock
to go.
and roll. Yeah.
Great, perfect. That sounds great. So that is one way that we can incorporate it through the rest of the training plan. And then you also mentioned towards the end of the presentation, and if you'd like, you can go back and view the programming slide, that 3-day split, to talk about how you can integrate this type of training into kind of a weekly program as well.
Yeah.
So there we go. All right, if you would like to check in and receive CECs for today's presentation, take a look at your slide and you will be able to see a video how you can get to where this will be sold on our ACE website. Once again, you are watching today for free, so we thank you for taking the time. If you would like to go back and rewatch anything that you missed, this link will stay live for the next 24 to 48 hours, but if you would like to purchase for CECs, make sure you follow the video or go to acefitness.org/past webinars to purchase for your continuing education credits. If you would like to join us next month, we have another live webinar coming up with the co-owner of Oh Baby Fitness, and we're going to be talking about pre- and postnatal guidelines and understanding the ACOG guidelines, which are really important for working with those pre- and postnatal clients. Once again, if you'd like to connect with ACE, we have a variety of ways to do that. Make sure you join us on our ACE Fitness Facebook page, and Pete's going to be taking a few more questions there. So if we didn't quite get to your question on the YouTube chat bar, make sure you go to our ACE Fitness Facebook page to type in your question, and we'll make sure that those get answered over the next few days. Thank you, Pete, very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun. Thank you.
All right, let's get people moving.